He was worth $50 million and commanded a corporate empire. But when he abandoned everything to chase after a night janitor, the truth behind his obsession would shake everyone who knew him. Richard Blackwood was the kind of man who made grown executives tremble with a single glance. At 42, he stood 6 feet tall with silver streak hair that he kept perfectly styled, and wore custom Italian suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. As CEO of Pinnacle Industries, a multinational corporation worth billions, Richard controlled the livelihoods of over 20,000 employees across 4 continents. His corner office on the 60th floor of Manhattan's most prestigious business tower was a monument to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk the size of a small car, and walls lined with awards and photos of him shaking hands with world leaders. Richard was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly consumed by the pursuit of success. He hadn't taken a vacation in 8 years, worked 16-hour days as a matter of routine, and measured his worth entirely in profit margins and stock prices. Miguel Santos was invisible to almost everyone who passed him in hallways. At 55, he was a small, quiet man with weathered hands and kind eyes that reflected a lifetime of hard work and humble acceptance. Miguel had been the night janitor at Pinnacle Industries for 12 years, arriving each evening at 9 p.m. to clean the offices while the corporate world slept. He wore the same navy blue uniform every night, pushed his cart through the marble corridors with practiced efficiency, and knew every corner of the building better than anyone. Miguel lived in a modest apartment in Queens with his wife Maria and sent most of his paycheck to his elderly mother in El Salvador. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name, left encouraging notes for stressed employees, and somehow made the sterile corporate environment feel a little more human. To Richard, Miguel was just part of the furniture, a necessary but unremarkable presence that he'd never bothered to truly notice. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in March. Richard had been working late again, preparing for a hostile takeover that would cement his reputation as one of the most feared CEOs in corporate America. It was nearly midnight when he decided to leave, but as he walked toward the elevator, he heard something that stopped him cold. From the conference room came the sound of singing, a soft, melodic voice singing in Spanish. Richard, who prided himself on maintaining absolute control over his environment, was irritated by this unexpected disruption. He pushed open the conference room door, ready to demand silence, but what he saw made him freeze. Miguel was cleaning the massive conference table, but he wasn't just working. He was singing a lullaby while carefully polishing each chair. In his free hand, he held a small, worn photograph. As Richard watched, Miguel placed a photo on the table, sang a few more lines, then kissed his fingertips and touched the image before putting it back in his pocket. There was something in that moment, a tenderness, a profound love, a connection to something beyond the sterile corporate world, that hit Richard like a physical blow. For 30 seconds, he stood frozen in the doorway, watching this private moment of humanity in the place he'd built to be all about power and profit. Richard's curiosity became an obsession. Night after night, he found excuses to stay late, to walk the halls, to observe Miguel without being noticed. He discovered that Miguel sang to that photograph every night, always the same lullaby, always with the same gentle reverence. Richard began researching Miguel's background, using his corporate resources to dig into the janitor's life. What he found made his blood run cold. The photograph was of Miguel's daughter, Sophia, who had died of leukemia at age 7, 15 years ago. Miguel had been singing that same lullaby to her memory every night for over a decade, a ritual of love and loss that he performed in the empty corporate halls while the world slept. But Richard's investigation revealed something even more devastating. Sophia had died because Miguel couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have saved her. The insurance company had denied coverage, and Miguel, working multiple jobs, couldn't raise the money in time. The treatment cost exactly what Richard spent on his monthly wine collection. This revelation hit Richard like a sledgehammer to his carefully constructed worldview. While he'd been accumulating wealth and power, men like Miguel had been losing everything that actually mattered. The discovery that broke Richard completely came when he learned that Miguel was planning to leave New York. Maria had been diagnosed with early-stage cancer, and they were moving to Arizona where her sister could help care for her during treatment. Miguel had given his 2 weeks' notice, but he'd asked to work those final nights alone. He wanted to say goodbye to the building where he'd spent so many years singing to his daughter's memory. Richard realized that Miguel's nightly ritual wasn't just about grief. It was about keeping Sophia's spirit alive in the only way he knew how, and soon even that would be taken from him. On Miguel's last night, Richard made a decision that would puzzle everyone who knew him for years to come. Instead of going home to his penthouse apartment, Richard waited in the parking garage until Miguel finished his shift. At 6 a.m., when Miguel walked to his beat-up Honda Civic, Richard was standing beside his Bentley, dressed in jeans and a simple shirt, clothes no one had ever seen him wear. Without explanation, Richard asked Miguel if he could follow him to Arizona. Miguel, confused and concerned, asked why. Richard's answer was simple: because I need to learn how to be human again. The drive across the country became a journey of transformation that neither man expected. Richard, who had spent decades issuing orders and controlling every aspect of his environment, found himself in the passenger seat of Miguel's old car, listening to stories about Sophia, about love, about the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Miguel, who had spent years being invisible, found himself in the unprecedented position of being truly seen by someone who had every reason to ignore him. During their 3-day journey, Richard learned that Miguel had never stopped working to help other families facing similar tragedies. Despite his modest income, Miguel donated to children's cancer research, volunteered at local hospitals, and had even started a small fund to help families who couldn't afford treatment. He'd been doing this quietly for years, never seeking recognition, never expecting anything in return. Richard realized that Miguel possessed something he'd spent his entire life chasing, but had never understood: purpose that extended beyond himself. When they reached Arizona, Richard didn't return to New York. Instead, he stayed in a small hotel room and spent his days helping Miguel and Maria settle into their new life. He used his business connections to ensure Maria received the best possible care, but he did it quietly, without fanfare, without expecting gratitude. For the first time in his adult life, Richard felt like he was doing something that mattered. The business world was in chaos. Pinnacle Industries stock plummeted as rumors swirled about their missing CEO. The board of directors launched a frantic search, hired private investigators, and even contacted the FBI. But Richard had disappeared completely, leaving behind only a cryptic resignation letter that said he was pursuing a different kind of success. His phone went unanswered, his emails unreturned, and his penthouse apartment remained empty. 3 months later, Richard finally broke his silence, but not in the way anyone expected. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't give interviews, and didn't publish a book about his transformation. Instead, he quietly established the Sophia Santos Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing medical care for children whose families couldn't afford treatment. He liquidated his assets, sold his companies, and donated nearly his entire fortune to the foundation. He moved permanently to Arizona, where he worked alongside Miguel to help other families facing impossible choices. The corporate world was stunned. Colleagues who had known Richard for decades couldn't understand his radical transformation. They demanded explanations, but Richard refused to discuss his decision with anyone. When pressed by reporters, he would only say that he'd learned the difference between being successful and being valuable. The mystery of his dramatic life change became legendary in business circles, but Richard seemed completely uninterested in their speculation. 2 years later, Richard and Miguel had helped save the lives of over 200 children through their foundation. Richard, now working as a hospital volunteer, had found a peace he'd never known existed. Miguel, watching his wife recover from her cancer treatment, had found a friend who understood that true wealth wasn't about what you accumulated, but what you were willing to give away. Richard never returned to the corporate world. He lived simply, worked quietly, and found joy in small moments that he'd never noticed before. His former colleagues continued to whisper about his dramatic transformation, but Richard had moved beyond caring about their opinions. He'd learned that the most important journey wasn't climbing the corporate ladder. It was discovering what it meant to be truly human. The lesson that changed everything for Richard was simple but profound. The people we overlook are often the ones who could teach us the most about what really matters. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from building an empire, but from learning to see the quiet heroes who make the world a little bit better one small act of love at a time. If you like that story, please subscribe for more. Thank you, and until next time.